Welcome to 80/20 Estate Planning, the show that explains smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, with your host, Al Gibbons. In this 13-week series, Mr. Gibbons and his guests will be discussing a multitude of critical and helpful topics, including his own 80/20 process. Feel free to call in with your questions, 621-WALE or 1-877-621-WALE. Now, 80/20 Estate Planning with Al Gibbons.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to 80/20 Estate Planning. How to do 80% of estate planning in 20% of the time normally required. How to get from A to Z in 60 days. This is the fourth part of a 13-part series. And I have two great guests with me today, and we have a lot to cover, so we're going to get right into it. Let me introduce my guests. I have Mr. Michael Hickox. Mike is a member of the American Bar and the State Bar of Michigan, the Probate and Trust Law sections. Mike is chairperson, Michigan Forum of Estate Planning of Attorneys. He's a member of the National Network of Estate Planning Attorneys and the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Mike began his legal career in 1972 in the general practice of law. He now specializes in the area of estate planning, business succession, charitable planning, as well as estate taxation. Mike prepares agreements and trust instruments needed to implement his clients' financial and estate plans. Mike, thanks very much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Okay, and also from Michigan, we have Mr. Sanford Mall. Sandy is co-founder and partner of Bachhofen Mall, a firm dedicated to estate planning, elder law, and planned giving. Sandy is also a council member of the Elder Law and Advocacy section of the State Bar of Michigan. He's a member of the National Network of Estate Planning Attorneys and also the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. Sandy has membership in the Planned Giving Roundtable of Southeastern Michigan and the National Committee on Planned Giving. Sandy, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Al. The pleasure's mine.
Great. Mike and Sandy, let me give a brief review of where we came from in our last show. In the third part of our series, we talked about had a discussion of basic estate planning tools. What does a will do? What is the purpose of a will? What are the alternatives to a will? And who should prepare or draft a will? Additionally, we talked about what are the stumbling blocks, what are the hold-ups to implementations of plans, and we're going to talk about some of that today. We really want to focus on implementation. So last week we talked about the selection of guardians, the selection of executors, the selection of trustees. Other tools we discussed, the most basic ones including, and what most people know, durable powers of attorney, living wills, advanced medical directives, living trusts, and so forth. So that brings us up to today. And Mike and Sandy, we want to talk about how to get these plans implemented, what it takes to get it done. We want to talk about that initially, the initial event of signing documents and so forth, and how we get to that point. And then we want to talk ongoing after what most people think when most people think it's done, after they've signed a will or done some trust work and so forth. So tell us a little bit, Mike, about your practice and how you lead up to implementation and what you see as some of the hold-ups why people don't get implemented.
Well, I think that one of the things that you just mentioned is you mentioned the event, and we really think that that it is a process, not an event. And too many times I think that in the implementation, folks will perceive this as being an event rather than an ongoing process and leave it at the signing of the documents.
So is the misperception, Mike, that all I've come to do here is reach this final dance and get it done, and then it's over?
Absolutely. I think folks tend to think that the documents contained in the book make the book a magic book that's going to just do all kinds of magical things when bad things happen, and it just doesn't work that way. It requires some attention, and the attention, I think, really comes from the team approach and the team process, and that That means not only the attorney and the clients, but their other advisors need to be part of the planning process and part of the implementation.
Now, Mike, are you saying that when you're getting everybody involved is prior to actually executing these documents?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it seems to me that we have this point at which we execute documents, we lead up to it, and then, Sandy, do we lead from that later on?
Well, yeah, of course, the most important thing is, at that point, is to know that you've got an effective plan design. Once you've got the design put together and you've got all of the players that have bought into the design, and you've then got a set of documents which are executed, as Mike says, these documents do not sprout arms and legs and go do magical things without some help. And so what we need to do at that point is begin to actually work through the details. For instance, one of the most important things that can be done after the documents are signed is to make sure that all of the assets, all the client's assets, are properly and completely titled into their estate.
So it seems to me what you're saying is you lead up to the documents, so you've done some things, you've gotten up to the documents, but then you have to go a step further and make sure that you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, so that the documents can actually work on an ongoing basis.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Good documents are not enough.
Okay, so, well then let's talk about, why don't we structure our conversation today about sort of leading up to getting the documents done, and then let's go from there, we'll pivot after that and talk about after the documents are done. Okay, how's that sound?
Great.
Okay, so let's talk about that, sort of this first part of the planning, and tell me if you've had experiences like mine. I was in a planning case, and it was out of town, and I had some other advisors around the table, and I said to the client, "Tell me about the terms of your will." And the client said, "I don't have a signed will." And the attorney said, "I've given you 4 wills to sign, and you haven't signed any of them." And the client said, "And I'm not going to until I understand what they say." Seems to me like one of the difficulties in implementation is to make sure that people understand. How do you handle that, Mike?
Well, actually, it's an educational process that begins with the first meeting, and that is the client educating you about the people in their lives and actually what I affectionately call the stuff in their lives, that is their personal property and their investments. And then you go on to talk about what documents or what processes and documents are available so that they have an understanding, and then they can make choices about what goals they want to achieve, and then we decide what tools are going to be used, and then right through continually reinforcing those documents. And then finally at the signing meeting, every paragraph of the document is explained and related back to the client. It's just another opportunity for them to become familiar with the documents, because this stuff isn't rocket science, but it's something that very few people are familiar with.
So you said that originally the client is educating us, and then,
right.
And then there comes sort of a second stage where we're educating the client.
Absolutely. The counseling portion of the estate planning is absolutely critical. Otherwise, it's just a stack of paper.
Well, Sandy, let me ask you. I have seen in numerous occasions where we've sort of gone through this, sometimes better than other times, the educational process both ways. Mm-hmm. But then we reach a stage where a lawyer may draft some tentative documents, some preliminary documents, and then sends them to the client for or the clients for their review. Mm-hmm. That does not seem to be very effective in a lot of cases. What do you think about that?
Well, Al, it's been my experience as well. Although I frequently get clients who ask for that, I tell them that the process is infinitely better for them and for us if we can work through whatever questions or concerns they may have together. I find that sending out documents that clients either don't read or perhaps don't understand with good guidance tends to slow the process down.
Okay. So you would prefer to review them with the client in person and walk them through those parts?
That's absolutely true. I think Mike and I both subscribe to a completely different paradigm than perhaps what most people might have seen out in the working with attorneys. We are not the kinds of attorneys that will take a paternalistic approach with our clients and say, here's what you need, and you need it because I say you need it. We want our clients to understand what it is they've got and why. And as Mike said, once we understand who they are, once we know what their hopes and dreams and fears and desires are, we can then help educate them on how the law can help them meet the opportunities and get over and overcome the obstacles that they may have in their plan.
So,
you know, Al, you mentioned was that a preference in Sandy's office, and I know that it is. It's a requirement in my office. I'm not going to send any documents out ahead of time.
Okay, so Sandy, is you similar then?
Yeah, it actually it has. It took me a little longer to get there. Mike convinced me that I should at least restrict the numbers that I send out that way, and I've reached a point where it has become a requirement in my office as well. I will send out a 2 or 3 page summary to a client to review just to make sure all the names are spelled right, all the Social Security numbers are right, and various other personal information. But we will not send out drafts of documents.
In that summary that's sent out, I think this is a real important point, Sandy. In the summary that's sent out, is it just the hard facts, or are you doing sort of an executive summary in which the documents underneath are trying to implement?
It actually is. It's kind of a combination. We've got I'm looking at one right now for a client, and it's actually 3 pages. And we attempt it to be an executive summary written in very, very plain English, so that the client can follow through and be able to see this is the decision pattern. This is what you say, who you say you want to be responsible when you're no longer able to handle these things on your own. And as long as they've reviewed it, they've got some comfort level that it reflects what they wanted. They've also identified for us, so we make sure all of our spellings are correct. And it makes it easier then for us also to follow through with that when they come in for the execution meeting.
Mike, if I were the client, Mike, and my style would be not to want to read all the documents. You know, so, I mean, the executive summary would be perfect for me. Mm-hmm. And I would presume if you sent me an executive summary that the documents, it's sort of your responsibility to make sure the documents match up with the executive summary. And as long as I'm okay with the executive summary, the details seem to be right in the executive summary, I'm sort of 95% of the way there. Is that true?
That's exactly right, and that explanation at the signing meeting is always tempered to the client's need for information. Some clients need a lot, some clients need a little, but they always have the opportunity, and there are some basics that we always cover to make sure that they understand, to help them get into this frame of thinking that this is not a magic book.
Well, Sandy, would you agree that empowerment here is really the issue leading up to the implementation of the documents, so that clients can really be in a position where they understand and they can act in the best interest of themselves and their families?
Empowerment is critical. That's a cornerstone to everything we're doing for our clients, is to help put them back in control, using the system effectively so that they can manage their estate now and in the future.
I'll tell you, that sounds great to me. Let's take a break. I want to talk about some of the other techniques that you use, and we'll do that on the other side of the break. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at Al Gibbons at algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940. Or email algibbons at algibbons.com.
Did you know that some ethnic groups have an AIDS infection rate 8 to 14 times that of white Americans? Did you know that there are powerful foreign interest groups behind the push for more and more restrictive gun control laws, and that their goal is to disarm American citizens so that we can never rebel against tyranny? American citizens need to know the truth. That's why you need the National Vanguard Books Catalog. For only $1, they will send you their big book catalog for patriots, listing over 400 books, tapes, and videos that the censors of political correctness don't want you to see. Send $1 today to National Vanguard Books, Department R, Post Office Box 90, Hillsborough, West Virginia, 24946. That's National Vanguard Books, Department R, Post Office Box 90, Hillsborough, West Virginia, 24946.
We describe things based on our experiences.
When an asthma attack comes, I just feel horrible.
When a child tells us how he feels, he uses words from his world.
It's like an elephant standing on my chest.
Children don't speak to sell. They speak to share. Look for the American Lung Association envelope in your mailbox. Find the Christmas seals. Help find a cure for asthma. Call 1-800-LUNG-USA.
Brought to you by the American Lung Association.
Talk to our expert host. In the Providence area, call 621-WALE. Outside the Providence area, call toll-free 1-877-621-WALE.
And now back to 80/20 Estate Planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
So, we're coming back now. We were talking about empowering clients, Mike and Sandy. And Mike, in the first segment, you talked about the client educating us. Let's assume, and we've talked about this on prior shows, let's assume that we've paid a lot of attention to this part of it. We understand what the client wants. And then we have this reciprocal responsibility to educate the client, to empower the client so that he can act in the best interest of his family. And so, in your experience, gentlemen, how long does this process take? Michael, does this take 5 meetings, 10 meetings?
No, typically we have an initial meeting with the clients. It'll go 2 to 3 hours. Mm-hmm. After that, after some decisions are made, we may have another meeting to make some critical decisions about people and distribution patterns and the plan design. And our commitment is once those agreements are reached, that our work will be complete within 2 weeks.
Oh, that's super. That is really a distinguishing thing, certainly from what often you see in the marketplace today. Well, so you're willing to pay basically the price up front, spend the time, get it right, and then the promise to the client is, you do that part, then we'll get it done in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just so critical for them to be able to have this protection in place.
And then, so you've had the meeting. I'm assuming, Mike, that there are maybe some unanswered questions or some that aren't totally settled. And so what happens at the next meeting? Do they think about some things?
They may think about some things.
Maybe they're not settled on distribution, for example, strategies or when for their kids.
In all honesty, it depends on the complexity of the estate, but the average estate plan, those kinds of decisions really come very quickly because although folks are a bit overwhelmed, their choices are really very limited. I mean, when you really let them know, and when they understand that this is typically a revocable living trust, they can change their minds, and they don't have to have a perfect plan the first time out of the box. It's always easier to edit than it is to create the first time.
Al, our experiences are very, very similar. What we do is we generally will have 2 meetings. It will usually be an initial meeting. It lasts about the same period of time, usually 2 to 3 hours. And we spend as much time as necessary, and we find that sometimes even if it has to go longer, that's okay, provided, of course, nobody has any time constraints. And we end up with a good design that the client has thought a lot about, and has some additional time between that initial meeting and our final meeting, which is 3 weeks. And we use a 3-week model because we are also sending the client the executive summary in between for them to review.
Right.
And if there are any changes, any second thoughts, any questions they have, we generally deal with those, and we're able to deal with those on the phone.
So, Sandy, let's assume we've gotten that far. You send out the executive summary, and now the clients are coming back in, and I guess presumably they're coming back in to finalize things, to sign the documents, and to implement their plan. Is that what happens?
Yes.
And so when you come to that meeting 3 weeks later, what happens if there are some changes there that take place? Are you able to handle those on the spot? How do you deal with that? Or do you find that most of the time there aren't any changes?
Well, what we have found is before using the executive summary, we were probably looking at changes about 30% of the time, 40% of the time. And they were mostly typographical in nature. On occasion, there would be some changes that the client would come in with as far as distribution plan changes. Every now and then they changed a trustee. But for the most part, I'd say the vast majority, we did not have changes. Since the executive summary, we've reduced that, and we are down now to very, very few changes.
Wow, what a great idea in the process, then, to have this executive summary and to send it out in between. And you are confirming the hard data, the spellings, and all that. So that's really great process. So, Mike, tell me, what about the signing event? And I know you don't like the word. What would you call it?
Actually, we'd call it a ceremony.
Okay, so tell me about yours. How do you do it?
Well, actually, it's the time when the clients come back and they're a little bit more comfortable with the documents, but they're still not certain about the plan. And it's a time when we can go through the documents, and I know that you indicated that you got your summary and you feel that you're 95% there and that's all you need. But there really are all kinds of provisions in these documents that you're not thinking about. And they really need to be explained. And the question isn't whether or not there'll be an explanation. It's how much detail that you'll get. And we always try in making those explanations to relate each of those areas to something in the client's personal life, something that we've learned about them that relates to how this would work in their situation, what problems it would solve. And that really brings it to a level where it now is the client's document. And
so let me interrupt for a moment, Mike. What you've had to do then is you have had to listen. This is sort of where the proof is in the pudding. You have had to listen very carefully when that client was educating you.
Absolutely, and you know what? That's what makes this ceremony fun, is because you pick up idiosyncrasies of the clients and the interplay between a husband and a wife, and you can use these things to make them familiar with the documents, because these are living documents, they're not death documents, and they require some attention.
Okay, Sandy, anything to add to that?
Well, like Mike, I'd say that this is a time when, and like you said, the proof's in the pudding. This is a time when we can actually take them through and show them what we call sometimes sweaters in the suitcase. We don't know if it's necessarily going to be cold, but it's nice to know that the plan has everything in it that's going to be needed, depending upon what transitions occur in their lives. And this is the time to do it.
So we've had great listening. We've understood the client's objectives. We've put the plan together. We've educated the client. And what we really want to know about now is in the signing ceremony, and I like that term, Mike, are we going to make sure that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's? And what I mean by that, we'll talk about right when we come back from the break that's coming up, and we'll talk about dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80-20 estate plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com.